Hello, Miss EJ's kids. We are up to chapter 7 of Betsy-Tacy. I've been using Owen's orange and green circle as a bookmark. Good job, Owen. We are going to be reading about plain paper dolls. So we're at chapter 7. Quite often after school, Betsy and Tacy went to Betsy's house and played paper dolls. Betsy and Tacy liked paper dolls better than real dolls. They wanted real dolls too, of course. The most important thing to see on Christmas morning, poking out of a stocking or sitting under a tree, was a big china doll with yellow curls and a blue silk dress and bonnet, or with black curls and a pink silk dress and bonnet. It didn't matter which. But after Christmas, they put those dolls away and played with their paper dolls. They cut the paper dolls from fashion magazines. They could hardly wait for their mother's magazines to grow old. Mrs. Benson didn't have any children, so she saved her fashion magazines for Betsy and Tacy. And when Miss Mead, the sewing woman, came to Betsy's house, she could be depended upon to leave a magazine or two behind. The chief trouble Betsy and Tacy had was in finding pictures of men and boys. There had to be father dolls and brother dolls, of course. The tailor shops had men's fashion sheets. But those fashion sheets were hard to get. Tacy's brother George worked next door to a tailor shop. He told Mr. Baumgarten, the tailor, that his little sister Tacy liked those fashion sheets. After that, Mr. Baumgarten saved all the fashion sheets for Tacy, and Tacy divided them with Betsy. The dolls were not only cut from magazines, they lived in magazines. Betsy and Tacy each had a doll family living in a magazine. The servant dolls were kept in a pile between the first 2 pages. A few pages on was a pile of father dolls. Then came the mother dolls, then the 16-year-olds, then the 10-year-olds, the 8-year-olds, the 5-year-olds, and the babies. Those were the dolls that Betsy and Tacy played with after school. Betsy and Tacy stopped in at Tacy's house to get her magazine and eat a cookie. Then they went on to Betsy's house, and when Betsy had kissed her mother and both of them had hung their wraps on the little closet of the back parlor, Betsy brought out the magazine in which her doll family lived. "Shall we play here beside the stove, Mama?" she asked. "Yes, that would be a good place to play," said Mrs. Ray, and it was. The fire glowed red through the isinglass windows of the big hard coal heater. It shone on the wild horses' heads, which ran in a procession around the shining nickel trim. Up on the warming ledge the tea kettle was singing. Underneath the stove, on the square metal plate which protected the green flowered carpet, Lady Jane Grey, the cat, was singing too. She opened one sleepy eye, but she kept on purring as Betsy and Tacy opened their magazines. "What shall we name the 5-year-old today?" Tacy asked Betsy. 5-year-olds were the most important members of the large doll families. Everything pleasant happened to them. They had all the adventures. The 8-year-olds lived very dull lives. They were always given very plain names. They were Jane and Martha, usually, or Anna and Jemima. Sometimes Betsy and Tacy forgot and called them Julia and Katie. But the 5-year-olds had beautiful names. They were Lucille and Evelyn, or Madeline and Millicent. "We'll be Madeline and Millicent today," Betsy decided. They played that it was morning. The servant dolls got up first. The servant dolls wore caps with long streamers and dainty ruffled aprons. They didn't look all like the hired girls of Hill Street, but like hired girls, they got up bright and early. The fathers and the mothers got up next. Then came the children, beginning with the oldest. The 5-year-olds came dancing down to breakfast on the fingers of Betsy and Tacy. "What are you two planning to do today, Madeline?" Betsy's father's doll asked his 5-year-old. "I'm going to play with Millicent, Papa." Madeline and Millicent pronounced Papa, Papa. "And I'm going to play with Jemima," said Betsy's 8-year-old, who was named Hannah today. "No, Hannah," said her father, "you must stay at home and wash the dishes, but Madeline may go." "Wouldn't you like to take the carriage, Madeline? You and Millicent could go for a nice ride. Here's $1 in case you want some candy." "Oh, thank you, Papa," said Madeline. She gave him an airy kiss. Meanwhile, Tacy's dolls were talking much the same way. Both father dolls were sent quickly down to work. The mothers went shopping, the babies were taken out in their carriages by the pretty servant dolls, and the older children were shut in the magazines. Then Betsy and Tacy each took her 5-year-old in hand, and the fun of the game began. First, they went to the candy store under the patent rocker. Madeline's dollar bought an enormous quantity of gumdrops and candy corn. Next, they sat down in their carriage, which was made of a shoebox. There were 2 strings attached, and Betsy and Tacy were the horses. Madeline and Millicent took a beautiful ride. They climbed the back parlor sofa. That was a mountain. "Let's have a picnic," said Madeline, and so they did. They picnicked on top of a pillow, which had the head of a girl embroidered on it. They swished through the dangling bamboo curtains, which separated the back parlor from the front parlor. And in the front parlor, they left their carriage again. They climbed the piano stool, that was a merry-go-round, and of course they had a ride. After calling on Miss Vanderbilt, who lived behind the starched lace curtains of the front parlor window, and Mrs. Astor, who lived under an easel which was draped in purple silk, they slipped by way of the dining room into the back parlor again. There they met their greatest adventure. The Betsy horse began to rear and snort. "What's the matter?" asked the Tacy horse. "A tiger! A tiger!" cried the Betsy horse. She jumped and kicked. The Tacy horse began to jump and kick too, looking about her for the tiger. Lady Jane Grey was awake and washing her face. What a fantastical, adorable tiger. "She's getting ready to eat us," cried the Betsy horse, leaping. "Help!" cried the Tacy horse, leaping too. They leapt so high that they overturned the carriage. Out went Madeline and Millicent on the highway of the green flowered carpet. "We're running away!" shouted the Betsy horse. "Whoa, whoa!" shouted the Tacy horse. They ran through the rattling bamboo curtains into the front parlor. There they stopped being horses and raced it back, out of breath, to be Madeline and Millicent again. Lady Jane Grey loved to play with paper. She entered obligingly into the game. "He's biting me!" shrieked Madeline. "He's scratching me!" shrieked Millicent. The tiger growled and pounced. Madeline and Millicent were rescued just in time. The father dolls rushed up and seized them and jumped into the coal scuttle. Lady Jane Grey jumped in too and jumped out, looking black instead of grey. And Betsy and Tacy scrambled in the coal scuttle, trying to fish out the father dolls before they got too black. There were never enough father dolls, in spite of Mr. Baumgarten. Julia and Katy came in just then from skating. The opening door brought in a rush of winter cold and dark. "Well, for goodness sake," they cried, "for goodness sake." They cried it so loud that Betsy's mother came in from the kitchen, where she was getting supper. "Betsy," she cried, "come straight out here and wash, and use soap and a washcloth and warm water from the kettle. You too, Tacy." "Yes, ma'am," said Betsy and Tacy. When they had washed, they put their paper dolls back into the magazines, and Katy helped Tacy into her outside wraps and took her by the hand, and they started home. Right at the door, Tacy turned around to smile at Betsy. "Whoa," she said instead of goodbye. "Giddy up," said Betsy instead of come again. "Whoa, giddy up. Whoa, giddy up," they said over and over. "Whatever are you two talking about?" said Julia and Katy crossly, which was just what Betsy and Tacy would hope they would say. Well, I kind of wish I had an older sister to grow up with. Good night, Miss EJ's kids.